What happens when the world decides your life is a story and they get the ending wrong? For months, rumors swirled around one of gospel music's most beloved couples. Questions about marriage, whispers about distance, and silence that spoke louder than words. What would you do if everyone assumed the worst about your life? How do you fight a narrative you didn't create when every move is under a microscope? In this video, we'll reveal the truth behind the headlines, what really happened, and why Pastor Joe's words changed everything. The rise that tested love before the rumors, before the headlines, before stadiums full of worshipers sang her songs in dozens of languages. There was simply a young woman named Sinach. She wasn't famous. She wasn't pursuing fame. She was a worship leader serving faithfully at Christ Embassy Church in Nigeria, writing songs in quiet moments, pouring her heart into ministry without any expectation that the world would ever notice. This was the season when her path crossed with a man whose life was equally rooted in faith and service. Pastor Joe Adu wasn't seeking the spotlight either. He was known within ministry circles as someone calm, intellectual, deeply committed to the work of building God's kingdom without needing recognition for his contributions. He noticed Sinach not because of her voice, though her voice was extraordinary. He noticed her humility, her discipline, the way she approached worship as genuine conversation with God, rather than performance for human approval. Their connection developed slowly, the way meaningful relationships should, built on prayer and shared conversations about purpose, strengthened through mutual respect and aligned vision for what their lives should mean. When they eventually married, those who knew them saw it as exactly what it appeared to be. Two people deeply devoted to God, walking the same direction, supporting each other's calling without competition or jealousy. The wedding was beautiful but modest. Close friends, church family, ministry leaders offering blessings. No tabloid coverage, no celebrity spectacle, just genuine joy and hope for the future they would build together. In those early days, nobody could have predicted what was coming. Nobody understood that the quiet worship leader would become a global phenomenon, or that her rise would test everything they thought they knew about love, partnership, and the price of answered prayers. Because Sinach's music didn't just spread, it exploded. What began as songs shared within Nigerian church communities somehow crossed borders, languages, and denominations until her voice was recognizable in places she had never visited. Waymaker became more than a song. It became a movement, translated into countless languages, sung in megachurches and tiny village gatherings alike, reaching people who had never heard of Christ Embassy or Nigerian gospel music before. Invitations poured in from every direction. America wanted her. Europe called constantly. South Africa, Asia, Australia, South America. The quiet worship leader who never sought attention suddenly couldn't escape it. Her calendar filled with international flights. Her time became something scheduled months in advance. Private moments with her husband grew rare, squeezed into gaps between obligations that kept multiplying no matter how carefully they tried to protect their peace. At first, Pastor Joe stood proudly beside her at every opportunity. He encouraged her gift, celebrated her milestones, prayed over her travels, and welcomed her home with the same love that had drawn them together in the beginning. But as her platform grew larger, something else grew alongside it. Distance. Not emotional distance initially, but physical separation that accumulated week after week, month after month, until the world started noticing what the couple was trying to navigate privately. Why isn't he always with her? Is something wrong at home? Is her success affecting their marriage? The questions started as whispers and grew into persistent speculation that followed them everywhere. The weight of silence. For years, Sinach and Pastor Joe chose the same response to every rumor: silence. They didn't dignify speculation with attention. They didn't release statements defending their marriage or explaining their choices. They simply continued doing what they had always done: serving God, pursuing their callings, and trusting that their private life was exactly that: private. But silence gets interpreted. When public figures don't speak, people fill the void with assumptions. The less Sinach and Pastor Joe said, the more others said on their behalf. Blog posts multiplied. Social media threads analyzed every photograph, every caption, every moment when they appeared separately at events where people expected them together. The narrative took shape without their participation, constructed entirely from observation and speculation. Some fans defended them fiercely, insisting that absence of public togetherness proved nothing about private reality. Others grew increasingly convinced that something significant was being hidden. The division deepened over time, with both camps equally certain they understood what was really happening behind the scenes. What nobody realized was that silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means people are simply choosing not to add their voices to chaos. Sometimes it means couples are working through challenges privately, without inviting millions of observers into their most vulnerable moments. Sometimes silence is the only dignity available when the world refuses to look away. The pressure on ministry marriages is something few outsiders truly comprehend. The expectation of perfection weighs constantly. Every disagreement feels like a potential scandal. Every struggle becomes ammunition for people who want to prove that faith leaders are hypocrites. The same platform that amplifies your message also amplifies scrutiny of your humanity. Sinach's songs taught millions about trusting God through storms. But singing about storms and living through them are entirely different experiences. Pastor Joe carried weight that nobody saw, supporting a wife whose calling required her presence everywhere except home, celebrating her success while processing the loneliness that came with it, watching strangers assume they understood his marriage based on Instagram posts and concert footage, holding back responses to accusations that would only fuel more controversy if addressed. The silence continued until it couldn't anymore. Humanity exposed. When Pastor Joe finally spoke, he didn't choose the method anyone expected. There was no press conference, no interview with a Christian media outlet, no carefully produced video statement designed to control the narrative. Instead, a post appeared on his social media. Quiet in presentation, but heavy with meaning that anyone paying attention could feel immediately. He didn't say the words people were waiting for. He didn't confirm the rumors directly or deny them completely. What he did was far more powerful and far more honest than a simple yes or no could ever be. Pastor Joe wrote about the reality of marriage, not the Instagram version where couples always smile and never struggle. The real version, where love requires daily choice rather than constant feeling. Where expectations from others can crush intimacy if you let them. Where the person you married might be called to something so enormous that your role becomes supporting from shadows rather than sharing the spotlight. He spoke about carrying silent burdens, learning to love beyond applause, understanding that peace in marriage isn't always loud or visible to observers. Sometimes peace looks like quiet endurance. Sometimes it looks like choosing grace over noise, when noise would be so much easier. The message didn't name Sinach directly. It didn't reference specific rumors or address particular accusations, but everyone reading understood. This was a man sharing fragments of his soul, after years of holding everything inside. This was exhaustion and faith and honesty woven together into something that defied simple categorization. One passage resonated more than any other. He wrote that fame does not protect a marriage, ministry does not replace communication, and silence does not always mean peace. Some of us are simply choosing grace over noise. Those words hit the gospel community like a sudden shift in atmosphere. This wasn't denial. This wasn't confirmation of disaster. This was acknowledgement that behind the worship albums and sold-out concerts, behind the testimonies and the miracles attributed to songs that touched desperate hearts, there were two real people navigating something difficult without a roadmap. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands shared the post within hours. Comment sections filled with prayers, encouragement, and in some cases, fear about what these words might indicate. Had he just confirmed marital struggles? Was this a cry for help? Or was this simply transparency about the pressures that every ministry marriage faces, amplified by extraordinary visibility? Supporters saw courage. Critics saw evasion. But everyone saw something they hadn't expected. Humanity, Sinach's response. As Pastor Joe's message spread across the internet, every eye turned toward one person. How would Sinach respond? For several days, she said nothing. No statements, no interviews, no direct acknowledgement that her husband had shared something deeply personal with millions of strangers. Her silence was interpreted 1,000 different ways by people who had never met her and knew nothing of her private reality. Then she posted a scripture, a verse from Psalms about trusting God through storms, about peace that comes not from circumstances but from the Lord Himself. Her caption was simple: God is still faithful. In the noise, in the silence, in the waiting, He remains. She didn't mention Pastor Joe. She didn't address the rumors. She didn't explain anything that people wanted explained. What she did was exactly what her entire ministry had always done. She pointed toward faith. Some fans saw strength in her response, a woman choosing to anchor herself in God rather than defend herself to a world that had already formed its opinions. Others interpreted it as confirmation that things weren't perfect, that she was finding comfort in Scripture because her personal life needed comforting. A few critics accused her of hiding behind Bible verses instead of facing truth directly. The division in interpretation reflected something important. People see what they're looking for. Those who wanted evidence of struggle found it in her measured words. Those who wanted evidence of faith found that too. The same post meant entirely different things depending on who was reading. What couldn't be disputed was the intentionality behind her choice. Sinach had spent her entire career pointing people toward God rather than toward herself. In the most scrutinized moment of her public life, she did exactly the same thing. Whatever was happening in her marriage, her response remained consistent with everything she had always been. Shortly after her post, Pastor Joe shared another message, this time about grace, patience, and the importance of understanding your partner's calling. It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't defensive. It sounded like a man explaining that love sometimes means letting someone shine, even when the shining requires sacrifice you didn't anticipate. Neither of them denied struggles. Neither confirmed disaster. What they did was remind the world that marriage, even in ministry, even when your songs are sung by millions, is not a performance. It's a journey that includes valleys alongside mountaintops. The gospel community responds. The conversation expanded beyond social media speculation into something more substantive. Church communities, ministry circles, and fellow gospel artists began engaging with what Sinach and Pastor Joe had inadvertently started. Members of Christ Embassy, while not releasing official statements, began sharing their observations quietly. Some expressed sorrow at sensing change in how the couple interacted during services. Others disagreed strongly, insisting they still witnessed unity and shared purpose whenever the family was together. The congregation found itself divided not in loyalty, but in interpretation. Everyone cared about the outcome. Nobody could agree on what they were actually seeing. Fellow gospel artists from Nigeria, South Africa, and the United States began posting messages that didn't mention Sinach or Pastor Joe by name, but clearly addressed the situation. They wrote about the dangers of idolizing celebrity couples, the importance of praying for leaders instead of gossiping about them, the reality that people who sing about grace need grace themselves. One well-known worship leader captured the sentiment perfectly. We sing about grace, yet forget that pastors and their families need grace too. Pray more. Assume less. The words resonated because they confronted something uncomfortable. The same audiences who felt moved by Sinach's songs had been consuming speculation about her marriage as entertainment. The same people who raised their hands during Waymaker were scrolling through rumor threads looking for evidence that her life wasn't as blessed as her music suggested. The division among fans became clearly visible. Supporters encouraged prayer, unity, and understanding, reminding everyone that no marriage is perfect and that silence doesn't equal guilt. Skeptics argued that public figures owed transparency to the communities they lead, that the vague messages from both spouses were hints of deeper issues being deliberately obscured. But something began shifting. Gradually, the voices of support grew louder than the voices of speculation. Churches around the world started including Sinach and Pastor Joe in their prayer sessions. Instead of gossip, people began posting messages of hope, healing, and encouragement. The narrative that had started as whispered criticism transformed into collective intercession. For the first time since the rumors began, love became louder than doubt. The turning point. Just when everything seemed to be settling into quieter territory, something unexpected happened. A shift in public activities that sparked fresh conversation and renewed questions about what was really unfolding. Sinach began appearing at major worship events again. Concerts in the United States, the United Kingdom, South Africa, Canada. Videos showed her singing passionately, smiling, leading worship with the same power that had always defined her ministry. But observers noticed something. Pastor Joe wasn't beside her at these events. He remained active in ministry, but locally, focused on smaller gatherings and community work, while his wife circled the globe. The couple was rarely seen together publicly, and that absence, whether intentional or circumstantial, didn't go unnoticed. Ministry decisions added complexity to the narrative. Sinach launched a new worship mentorship program for young gospel artists. It was beautiful and well-received, exactly the kind of kingdom investment her platform made possible. But Pastor Joe wasn't officially listed as part of it, despite having been involved in many of her previous ministry efforts. Meanwhile, he began posting from church conferences, where Sinach wasn't present. Some believed this separation in ministry roles was intentional and healthy. Space for each person to focus on their individual calling while supporting each other privately. Others felt it signaled emotional distance, two people slowly moving in different directions, even if the formal structure of marriage remained intact. Then came an evening in Canada that nobody who witnessed it will forget. During a concert performance of Waymaker, Sinach paused unexpectedly. With tears visible in her eyes, she spoke directly to the audience. Sometimes the people God uses the most walk through the deepest valleys, but His presence never leaves us. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. The audience fell silent, understanding that they were witnessing something real. Her music had always carried emotional weight, but in that moment, everyone present knew the songs were coming from lived experience rather than theological concept. Pastor Joe responded days later with his own message. Love is not proven in easy seasons. It is proven in storms, when choice becomes stronger than feelings. Pray for your leaders. We are human too. Again, no names, no specifics. Just words that resonated with everything people were already sensing. The cameras have stopped rolling. The headlines will fade. And yet, the story doesn't end here. Behind the songs that fill stadiums and the worship that reaches millions, there are two people navigating a reality most of us can only imagine. A life where faith, love, and marriage exist under constant scrutiny, where every choice is dissected and every silence misinterpreted. Pastor Joe and Sinach remind us that endurance is not always loud, that commitment isn't measured in public gestures, and that grace often looks like quiet strength in moments no one sees. But the question remains, how does a marriage survive when devotion collides with fame? When presence is fragmented by the very calling that brought you together? And when the world demands answers that may not exist? This isn't scandal. This isn't speculation. This is life unfolding in real time. And the next chapter promises revelations about resilience, faith, and the costs and the beauty of living publicly while keeping your heart private.